It was a night that seemed ordinary in the White House, lamps glowing softly, footsteps echoing in familiar hallways, but beneath the calm, a chilling tension lingered. Abraham Lincoln, the man who had guided a nation through its darkest war, would unknowingly walk into history's most fateful evening. What happened that night would not only change the course of a nation, it would seal the legacy of a president forever. Tonight, we step inside Lincoln's final hours. The White House was unusually quiet that evening, though the heavy weight of history pressed upon its walls. The Civil War, which had raged for over 4 years, had finally drawn to a close, leaving the nation both relieved and fragile. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, sat in his modest study, surrounded by the faint flicker of candlelight that danced across the room's simple furnishings. It was a room of contemplation, where the burdens of leadership pressed upon him in ways few could ever understand. The soft ticking of a clock marked time with a steady insistence, reminding him that the night was moving toward an unknown future, one in which he would not merely observe events, but be part of a moment that would etch itself into the consciousness of generations to come. Lincoln's face, gaunt from years of stress and sorrow, reflected the trials he had endured. The war had claimed countless lives, yet now there was hope, fragile as it was, that the nation might heal. He glanced at the stacks of documents on his desk, correspondence from generals, letters from grieving families, petitions from citizens seeking justice, and drafts of legislation meant to guide the country forward. Each paper represented a story, a human soul touched by the chaos of war and the slow labor of reconstruction. He touched them lightly, as if to grasp too firmly would somehow mar the memory of those who had sacrificed so much. In those quiet moments, the weight of responsibility was both immense and intimate. Mary Todd Lincoln entered the room softly, her presence a balm to his weary mind. The First Lady had always been a complex companion, passionate, sometimes volatile, yet profoundly devoted to her husband and the ideals he carried. She approached him quietly, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Abraham," she whispered, her voice a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety, "you look as if you carry the whole nation upon your shoulders." He allowed a small, tired smile. "Perhaps I do, but the burden feels lighter when shared." For a moment they sat together in silence, the shadows of the room lengthening as night deepened, their shared glances speaking volumes where words might fail. Outside, the city of Washington moved with an air of cautious normalcy. Soldiers, still stationed in various parts of the capital, maintained vigilant watch over a population adjusting to peace. Smoke from distant chimneys curled into the winter air, and the muted sounds of horse-drawn carriages echoed through the streets. Inside the White House, however, time seemed to move at a different pace, slower and more deliberate, as though each tick of the clock offered a precious chance to reflect, to savor the present while bracing for the future. Lincoln, for all his public visibility, was acutely aware that these private hours were fleeting and sacred. The president took up a sheet of paper and began to write, his handwriting careful, deliberate. Each word was chosen with thought, a testament to his enduring dedication to clarity and moral purpose. His mind wandered to the state of the country, the process of reunification, the hopes of freedmen, the lingering bitterness among Confederate sympathizers, and the daunting task of reconciliation. These were not abstract concerns, but real, urgent matters demanding attention. Yet tonight, he allowed himself a brief respite, knowing that even a single evening of peace could fortify the mind and spirit for the challenges to come.
Lincoln's aides were summoned to the room intermittently, bringing updates, reports, and messages from both Washington and distant fronts. Each visitor was greeted with the same quiet dignity that had become his hallmark. Despite the fatigue etched on his face, he listened intently, offering guidance with clarity and compassion. There was a sense that in this room, amid the soft rustle of papers and the subdued voices of those who served him, history itself was pausing to witness a man who bore the weight of an entire nation with humility and resolve. Even as he met with his closest advisors, Lincoln's thoughts often drifted toward the personal. He considered his sons, who had grown in the shadow of a father whose every decision was entwined with the fate of millions. Tad and Robert, innocent of the burdens that their father carried, yet perceptive enough to sense the gravity of the era, would one day understand the magnitude of these moments. The weight of history and the intimacy of family intersected in these quiet hours, revealing the paradox of a life spent both in public scrutiny and private reflection. Dinner was a modest affair, yet it carried the warmth of familiarity. Lincoln, Mary, and their sons gathered around a simple table, sharing a meal that was less about sustenance and more about human connection. The conversation meandered from light-hearted anecdotes to reflections on the past year's turmoil. Laughter occasionally punctuated the evening, a testament to the resilience of spirit that Lincoln prized, even amid sorrow. The clinking of utensils and the soft murmur of voices created a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the weighty matters awaiting him outside the walls of the White House. As night deepened, Lincoln retired to a quiet corner of the residence to read. He selected passages from classical literature and political philosophy, drawing lessons and comfort from the wisdom of those who had navigated trials before him. The words of thinkers long deceased provided both counsel and companionship, reinforcing the president's belief that human progress, though often slow and painful, was attainable through steadfast commitment to justice and reason. His reading was interrupted only occasionally by a knock at the door, each interruption a reminder that even in the stillness, the demands of leadership were never fully suspended. The evening was also a time for reflection on mortality and legacy. Lincoln, who had witnessed the fragility of life in countless letters from soldiers and families, could not help but ponder his own place in the flow of history. The candlelight cast long shadows, symbolically stretching across the room like the long reach of past events into the present. He considered what future generations might remember of him, not only as a president, but as a man who sought to preserve the Union, alleviate suffering, and extend the principles of liberty to all citizens. These thoughts were tinged with both solemnity and hope, as he acknowledged the fleeting nature of life, yet affirmed the enduring power of ideas. As the clock neared the late hours, Lincoln prepared for the evening's final engagements. Plans had been made to attend Ford's Theater, an outing that promised both respite and cultural enrichment. Yet even in anticipation, he maintained his reflective demeanor, understanding that every moment carried significance. He spoke briefly with Mary, offering gentle words of reassurance, and made sure that the household was settled. The quiet dignity of preparation underscored the meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his life in office, a commitment not only to duty, but also to the ethical and moral imperatives that guided his every action. Finally, as he gazed out a window toward the softly illuminated streets of Washington, Lincoln allowed himself a moment of profound stillness. The city slept uneasily, its future uncertain, yet there was a sense of fragile hope, a belief that the trials endured had not been in vain. In that brief pause, the weight of history, the intimacy of family, and the solitude of leadership converged. The White House, a silent witness to countless decisions that had shaped the nation, now observed its occupant in his final hours of reflection, a man both ordinary in his human frailties and extraordinary in the breadth of his vision and courage. The evening at the White House was a tapestry of contrasts, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, hope and lingering apprehension. It captured the essence of Abraham Lincoln, leader, father, husband, and philosopher, poised at the intersection of personal intimacy and national destiny. In those quiet hours, he embodied the resilience and moral clarity that would define his legacy, setting the stage for the final historic night that would soon unfold.
The war had ended, but the echoes of its violence reverberated across the United States. Cities bore scars from battles, fields were pockmarked with trenches, and families mourned loved ones whose names would never again grace the dinner table. Yet amid the sorrow and destruction, there was cautious hope. Abraham Lincoln, sitting in the White House, understood the paradox of this moment. A nation liberated from conflict, yet teetering on the edge of instability. The peace he envisioned was not merely the absence of gunfire. It was a profound reconciliation of a divided society, a restoration of trust, and a reaffirmation of shared ideals. Even as Washington seemed to settle into an uneasy calm, Lincoln was acutely aware of the fragility of the moment. Messages from governors and generals arrived with alarming frequency, describing isolated skirmishes, lingering Confederate sympathizers, and tensions in border states. Though the formal instruments of war had concluded with surrender, the hearts and minds of men and women were far from pacified. Lincoln's understanding of leadership extended beyond the battlefield. He knew that peace demanded patience, prudence, and moral authority, perhaps more so than the strategies that had won victories on the field. In private, Lincoln reflected on the enormity of the task ahead. He had always believed that the Union was more than a political entity. It was a living, breathing experiment in democracy, capable of growth and adaptation, but vulnerable to hatred, mistrust, and vengeance. Now, freed from the immediate pressures of combat, he saw the immense challenge of knitting the nation back together. He thought of freedmen in the South who had endured slavery and now faced uncertainty in a land still ruled by prejudice and fear. He pondered the returning soldiers, many of whom had seen friends die beside them, whose loyalty to the Union was tempered by grief and disillusionment. And he considered the families of the fallen, whose anguish demanded empathy and justice from a nation struggling to define itself anew. Lincoln summoned his cabinet for an evening meeting, knowing that the policies enacted in the coming weeks would set the course for generations. Secretary of State William H. Seward, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and Treasury Secretary John A. Andrew gathered in the modest council chamber. Lincoln's eyes, weary yet penetrating, scanned each face as he spoke with deliberate care. "Gentlemen," he began, "the war has ended, but our work is only beginning. We must not allow the triumph of the Union to blind us to the obligations of peace. If we fail now, all the sacrifices made will have been in vain." The room was heavy with thought. Each advisor understood the weight of Lincoln's words. Seward, always pragmatic, spoke of diplomatic efforts to reassure foreign powers that the Union remained stable. Stanton focused on the disbanding of the armies and ensuring that soldiers returned to their communities with order and dignity. Andrew highlighted the need to secure funding for reconstruction, schools for freedmen, and relief for war-torn regions. Each proposal was rooted in a vision of national restoration, yet Lincoln knew that the task required more than strategy. It demanded moral authority to heal a fractured people. Meanwhile, across the country, citizens navigated a complex landscape of hope and uncertainty. Families returned to homes that had been ravaged by occupation or battle, while others sought to rebuild communities from scratch. Former slaves looked toward freedom with cautious optimism, aware that legal emancipation did not guarantee social equality. Lincoln's words and policies were crucial, for they were not abstract directives, but lifelines to a population desperate for guidance. His leadership had always been marked by empathy, and now it was tested in a new arena, where success was measured not in military victories, but in the hearts and minds of a weary populace. In the capital, newspapers reflected this tension vividly. Headlines oscillated between relief at the cessation of hostilities and apprehension over the fragile state of the nation. Accounts of surrender ceremonies and the return of Union soldiers were juxtaposed with reports of lingering violence and lawlessness in the South. Lincoln, ever attentive to public sentiment, read these dispatches with a combination of pride and concern. He understood that peace required not only political agreements, but also public confidence and moral clarity, and that his own example as a leader would profoundly influence the trajectory of the nation. In the capital, Lincoln's personal reflections intertwined with his responsibilities. He considered the lessons of history, recalling past leaders who had sought to bind divided peoples together. He pondered the decisions that might one day be scrutinized by historians, the moments when compromise would clash with principle, and the delicate balance between justice and mercy. Every letter he wrote, every policy he enacted, and every word he spoke carried significance. The weight of the present, coupled with the desire to shape a more unified future, pressed upon him like a living presence.
Mary Todd Lincoln remained a steady presence throughout the evening. She understood the moral and emotional labor her husband carried and offered quiet counsel and reassurance. Their conversations were often candid, touching upon the toll of leadership, the anguish of families, and the uncertain path forward. For a man who bore the hopes of a nation, these personal interactions were vital, grounding him in the human experience even as the machinery of state demanded constant attention. Their dialogue was a testament to the interplay between private intimacy and public duty, a dynamic that defined Lincoln's unique leadership. As the night deepened, Lincoln reviewed plans for Reconstruction. He contemplated strategies to restore the Southern states to the Union with minimal animosity, to secure the rights of newly freed African Americans, and to foster an environment in which reconciliation could occur without sacrificing justice. He was acutely aware of the challenges posed by entrenched prejudices and the potential for violence to undermine these efforts. Each decision required a careful weighing of risks, moral imperatives, and the pragmatic realities of governance. The future of the nation, fragile yet full of possibility, rested in the careful orchestration of these choices. Lincoln also spent time considering the symbolic importance of leadership. He understood that the actions of a president were amplified by the weight of the office, and that every public gesture carried meaning. By embodying patience, compassion, and resolve, he could inspire a nation scarred by conflict to pursue unity over revenge, understanding over resentment. He was determined that the peace achieved should not be merely temporary or superficial, but rooted in principles that would endure, fostering a culture of respect, equality, and shared purpose. Finally, as the evening drew toward its close, Lincoln allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. He gazed out the window at the city below, its streets dimly lit, imagining the families who would sleep that night with hope mingled with fear. The war was over, yet its consequences lingered, and the path to lasting peace was uncertain and treacherous. In that stillness, Lincoln's mind traced the contours of the future, a nation rebuilt not solely by laws and proclamations, but by the collective will of its people, guided by justice, compassion, and a shared purpose for liberty. The evening at the White House, marked by strategy, reflection, and quiet resolve, encapsulated the paradox of victory. Triumph shadowed by the responsibilities of peace. Abraham Lincoln, seated in the flickering glow of candlelight,
embodied the profound intersection of moral courage, political acumen, and personal endurance. In that stillness, Lincoln navigated the delicate balance between the hope for a unified nation and the enduring wounds left by war, poised to shape a future that would test the very ideals upon which the United States was founded. Through the lens of that evening, it is possible to glimpse the full magnitude of Lincoln's leadership. Peace was not a gift to be received passively, but a challenge to be actively pursued, requiring vigilance, empathy, and unwavering commitment to principle. The nation teetered on the brink, yet with Lincoln's guidance, there remained the promise that it could emerge stronger, more just, and capable of realizing the ideals for which so many had sacrificed. In this fragile moment, the seeds of reconstruction, reconciliation, and enduring liberty were sown, seeds that, in time, would define the legacy of a nation seeking to heal from its deepest wounds.
The candlelight flickered softly against the tall windows of the White House study, casting elongated shadows across the room where Abraham Lincoln sat in solitude. The day's meetings, reports, and ceremonial duties had concluded, leaving him in the rare quiet of personal reflection. Though the Civil War had drawn to an official close, the weight of leadership lingered like a tangible presence, pressing upon his shoulders and shadowing even the simplest moments of reprieve. In these private hours, the enormity of what he had endured and what still lay ahead revealed itself most clearly. Lincoln's mind was a turbulent sea of thought, each wave carrying both triumph and sorrow. He reflected on the countless lives lost in the war, the fields and towns ravaged, and the families torn apart by grief. These reflections were not abstract. They were faces and names, images that would not leave his memory. He recalled letters from widows and children, each plea a reminder of the human cost of the Union's preservation. As he read and reread these notes, a profound sense of responsibility weighed upon him. The victory of the nation was inseparable from the personal suffering it had inflicted. Yet he understood that he could not dwell solely in grief, for action and guidance were required if the fragile peace he envisioned was to endure. He shifted in his chair, resting his elbows on the desk, hands clasped in contemplation. Lincoln often grappled with the tension between public duty and personal emotion. The presidency demanded stoicism, yet he felt deeply, perhaps more than most could bear. Memories of his own family, joyful and tragic, surfaced with uncanny clarity. He thought of his sons, whose laughter had once brightened the somber rooms of the White House, now tempered by the shadow of national upheaval. He remembered the death of Willie, the profound grief that had touched both him and Mary Todd, a wound that never fully healed. These private sorrows intertwined with the collective mourning of a nation, a constant reminder that leadership demanded the endurance of both heart and mind. Lincoln's health, too, was a source of subtle worry. Years of stress, sleepless nights, and the unrelenting demands of the office had taken their toll. He often felt the stiffness in his joints, the fatigue in his limbs, and the occasional dizziness that reminded him of the fragility of his own body. Yet he pressed onward, believing that the moral imperative of his role superseded personal comfort. The struggle was ongoing, how to remain strong for the country while acknowledging the human limitations that defined every individual. In these quiet hours, he allowed himself the honesty that public appearances forbade. He could be weary, anxious, and uncertain, yet still resolved to act with courage and clarity. Mary Todd Lincoln's presence was a constant anchor in these moments. She moved quietly through the halls of the White House, her footsteps echoing softly, a reminder that even in solitude, Abraham was not alone.
Their conversations, often candid and deeply personal, ranged from practical concerns about the household to reflections on the moral obligations of leadership. "Abraham," she would say gently, "you carry the world in your hands, but do not forget that your own heart must be tended as well." These words, simple yet profound, offered both solace and challenge, reminding him that vulnerability did not negate strength, but rather enriched it. The president's thoughts frequently turned inward, exploring the moral dimensions of his decisions. He wrestled with questions that had no simple answers: how to balance justice with mercy, how to rebuild trust in communities fractured by hate and violence, how to honor the dead while forging a path for the living. Each reflection was a meditation on human nature, ethics, and the practical realities of governance. Lincoln understood that leadership was a crucible in which character and judgment were tested incessantly, and that personal struggle was inseparable from public responsibility. Letters from citizens and soldiers lay strewn across his desk, each one a microcosm of hope and despair. A young soldier had written of returning home to a burned village, uncertain if his family had survived. A widow had described the anguish of raising children alone, her words infused with both grief and a quiet determination to endure. These letters were more than correspondence. They were the Calomares compass by which he navigated the complex terrain of policy, politics, and personal conscience. In solitude, he also revisited his own failures and doubts. Leadership, he understood, was never without error. Decisions made in haste or under pressure sometimes yielded unintended consequences. He thought of battles lost, miscommunications that had cost lives, and policies that had fallen short of their intended justice. Yet he did not allow regret to immobilize him. Instead, he used reflection as a tool to refine judgment, to ensure that future decisions were informed by wisdom, humility, and an acute awareness of human frailty. These private struggles were not a sign of weakness, but of engagement with the moral dimensions of power. The night deepened, and Lincoln's thoughts expanded beyond the immediate challenges to the broader arc of history. He considered the legacy of his actions, both the triumphs and the mistakes, and the lessons that future generations might derive from the struggles of the present. He pondered the fragility of democracy, the dangers of division, and the enduring need for courage tempered by compassion. In these meditations, he found purpose and perspective, a reminder that even the weightiest burdens of leadership were part of a continuum in which individual lives and national destiny intersected. Lincoln also wrestled with the isolation inherent in his position. Though surrounded by advisors, family, and friends, the ultimate responsibility rested squarely on his shoulders. Decisions could not be shared, nor could the moral consequences of action or inaction be transferred. This solitude was both a burden and a necessity, for it afforded the clarity required to act decisively. Yet it was also a source of profound struggle, a reminder that even the strongest leaders must confront their doubts, fears, and personal limitations.
Despite the weight of these reflections, Lincoln sought moments of solace and humanity. He walked the quiet corridors of the White House, pausing to gaze at portraits of past presidents, drawing inspiration and perspective from the lineage of leadership. He paused to write in his personal journal, articulating thoughts too complex or intimate for public record. The act of writing, of translating thought into words, offered both catharsis and clarity, allowing him to confront inner turmoil while preparing for the moral and practical demands of the day ahead. In these private hours, Lincoln also embraced the role of father and husband. He considered the well-being of his sons, their futures, and the moral education they would require to navigate a world shaped by conflict and rapid change.
He spoke gently with Mary about household matters, offering reassurance while listening with full attention to her concerns. These interactions, though seemingly ordinary, were infused with the extraordinary awareness that the stability and integrity of the family were intimately connected to the moral health of the nation. Lincoln's reflections were not confined to sorrow or duty. They also encompassed hope and vision. He envisioned a nation restored, communities reconciled, and citizens bound together by shared ideals rather than residual animosities. He imagined schools where freedmen could learn and thrive, courts where justice was impartial, and leaders who governed with integrity and foresight. These visions sustained him, offering both motivation and comfort in the midst of personal struggle. He understood that leadership required imagination, the ability to conceive of a better future even when the present was bleak and uncertain. As the night wore on, Lincoln's thoughts often returned to the nature of human resilience. He reflected on the courage of soldiers, the determination of families to rebuild, and the capacity of citizens to forgive and heal. These reflections reinforced his belief in the possibility of national renewal. He recognized that private struggle was not merely personal, it was intertwined with collective endurance, a shared labor of conscience and courage that would shape the moral and political landscape of the United States for generations. The quiet hours of the evening were punctuated by the soft rustle of papers, the distant murmur of guards in the halls, and the occasional flicker of candlelight. Each sound reminded Lincoln that while he contended with personal reflection and inner struggle, the machinery of governance continued. Decisions awaited, challenges persisted, and the fragile peace of the nation required vigilance. Yet in these moments of solitude, he cultivated the clarity, patience, and moral fortitude that defined his leadership. By the early hours of the morning, Lincoln's reflections had traversed the breadth of human experience, grief and joy, failure and success, doubt and hope. He had confronted the burdens of the presidency, the imperatives of justice, and the fragility of his own humanity. Yet in doing so, he also reaffirmed his commitment to serve, to heal, and to guide the nation through the uncertain dawn of peace. These private struggles, though invisible to the public, were the crucible in which his enduring legacy was forged. The night at the White House, in its quiet and solitude, was a testament to the depth of Lincoln's character. It revealed a man profoundly aware of the moral weight of leadership, the personal costs of public service, and the delicate balance between introspection and action. In the stillness of private reflection, he navigated the complex terrain of personal struggle and national responsibility, embodying a rare blend of humanity, wisdom, and unwavering commitment. As dawn approached, Lincoln finally allowed himself a moment of rest, understanding that the challenges of the coming day would demand renewed energy and focus. The private reflections and personal struggles of the night had not weakened him, rather they had fortified his resolve. In the quiet glow of the White House, amidst papers, letters, and the lingering shadows of candlelight, Abraham Lincoln stood prepared to confront the challenges of a nation on the threshold of peace, guided by conscience, empathy, and an unshakable vision for the future. The evening air in the White House was tinged with a peculiar mixture of relief, fatigue, and unspoken tension. Abraham Lincoln, aware of the fragile peace that now held the nation together, moved through the corridors with a quiet solemnity. Though the Civil War had officially ended, the work of rebuilding trust, mending divisions, and guiding the country toward reconciliation demanded relentless attention. In this charged atmosphere, Lincoln felt compelled to meet with friends and colleagues, those who had stood by him through the darkest days, who had shared counsel, insight, and unwavering support. This evening, however, carried the intangible weight of a finality that even he could scarcely name. Within the study, several cabinet members gathered for their customary evening session. William H. Seward, Secretary of State, bore the marks of concern etched into his face, yet his demeanor remained composed. Edwin M. Stanton, the formidable Secretary of War, carried the tension of responsibility like a second skin, his gaze steady and unyielding. Lincoln, moving from desk to window to chair with measured grace, greeted each man with warmth, though his eyes betrayed the depth of his contemplation. Tonight, they were not mere advisors, they were companions in a shared journey, each having witnessed the extraordinary and at times harrowing trajectory of a nation at war. Lincoln spoke first, his voice calm yet imbued with authority. "Gentlemen," he began, "we have walked through fire together. Not one of us has remained untouched by the toll of this conflict, yet each has borne duty with courage and integrity. I cannot overstate my gratitude for your counsel, your loyalty, and your steadfastness. Tonight, let us speak not only of the past, but also of the peace that we have helped secure, however tenuous it may feel." The room fell into a contemplative silence, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. Each man recognized the gravity of Lincoln's words, understanding that while the war might be over in a formal sense, the burdens of reconciliation, governance, and the preservation of liberty were only beginning. Seward, ever pragmatic, responded with thoughtful analysis of foreign affairs and the challenges of post-war diplomacy. Stanton spoke of demobilization, of ensuring that soldiers returned home with dignity and that law and order were maintained in communities still raw with tension. Lincoln listened intently, his mind balancing the practical, the moral, and the profoundly human. Yet this evening was also about more than policy. Lincoln recognized the necessity of personal connection, of acknowledging the human relationships that had sustained him through adversity. He moved among his colleagues with a quiet attentiveness, inquiring about families, personal health, and the quiet tolls exacted by years of unrelenting service. These moments of personal attention were more than gestures of politeness. They were expressions of profound empathy, a recognition that the bonds forged in crisis were fragile, valuable, and worth cherishing. Beyond the cabinet, Lincoln's circle of friends, politicians, aides, and confidants gathered in informal conversation. There was laughter, though tinged with wistfulness, and stories were exchanged, some humorous, some reflective, all revealing the shared experiences that had shaped their collective endurance. Lincoln listened with an attentive ear, interjecting occasional witticisms or gentle counsel, creating an atmosphere that balanced levity and gravity. These interactions allowed him to express gratitude in ways that formal addresses could not convey, reinforcing the connections that undergirded both personal and national resilience. Among the visitors was John Hay, Lincoln's private secretary, who had observed the president's tireless devotion and often offered both practical assistance and candid counsel. The conversation between them was understated but significant. Hay spoke of administrative challenges, upcoming correspondence, and the delicate matters of reconciliation with former Confederates. Lincoln, in turn, imparted guidance that was equal parts wisdom, moral clarity, and practical instruction. In this exchange, the interweaving of friendship, mentorship, and professional responsibility was evident, reflecting the multifaceted nature of leadership itself. Lincoln also made time to meet with members of his extended family and close friends outside of formal office duties. He moved through the hallways of the White House with a warmth and attentiveness that belied the enormous burdens he carried. For each individual, he offered words of reassurance, encouragement, or gratitude, recognizing that these relationships were both personal anchors and reflections of the broader social fabric of the nation. Even brief interactions were imbued with a sense of purpose, for Lincoln understood that leadership extended beyond policy and proclamation. It was lived in the fidelity to those one serves and the empathy one demonstrates. Throughout these farewells, Lincoln's reflections on mortality and legacy remained present, though rarely spoken aloud. He understood that time was fleeting, and that each encounter, each conversation, carried significance beyond the immediate moment. He considered what history might record, how future generations would interpret the choices made, and how the bonds of loyalty and friendship forged in crisis would be remembered. These thoughts, intimate and often private, informed his manner, lending a quiet gravity to interactions that otherwise appeared casual or convivial. As the evening progressed, discussions naturally turned to the nation's moral and political future. Lincoln spoke of the need to embrace reconciliation without sacrificing justice, to extend compassion even to those who had opposed the Union, and to ensure that freedom and equality were not merely ideals on paper, but lived realities. His colleagues, inspired by his vision and tempered by their own experiences, engaged with seriousness and respect. The dialogue was a balance of hope and caution, strategy and ethics, a microcosm of the broader challenges that awaited the nation in the uncertain days to come. Yet even amidst these weighty discussions, Lincoln's humor and humanity emerged. He shared stories of his youth, reflections on past political contests, and observations of human nature, eliciting smiles, laughter, and occasional mirth. These moments were not frivolous. They were essential reminders that leadership required balance, that resilience and morale were cultivated as much through shared joy as through the solemnity of duty. His colleagues responded in kind, offering their own anecdotes and reflections, creating a tapestry of connection, camaraderie, and mutual respect. Toward the later hours, the tone of the evening shifted toward intimacy and farewell. Lincoln, sensing the approaching departure to Ford's Theater, spoke with deliberate tenderness to those present. "I am grateful," he said softly, "for the counsel, the camaraderie, and the courage that has carried us through unimaginable trials. Whatever tomorrow brings, let us carry the bonds forged in these days as a source of strength, wisdom, and compassion." His words resonated, not merely as formal acknowledgement, but as heartfelt recognition of shared sacrifice, trust, and humanity. He lingered with individual colleagues, offering final guidance, reassurance, and in some cases, private confidences. These interactions revealed a man profoundly aware of the human dimension of leadership, the interplay of duty, friendship, and moral responsibility. Lincoln's attentiveness, even in the midst of personal fatigue and national strain, reflected a commitment to treating each relationship with dignity, care, and respect. For those present, these farewells were both poignant and instructive, providing a glimpse into the inner life of a president who bore the burdens of office with grace, empathy, and unwavering principle. The evening was further marked by Lincoln's attentiveness to ceremony and decorum. Though the tone was warm and personal, he maintained the dignity befitting the office, ensuring that interactions reflected both his humanity and the responsibilities of leadership. In balancing informality with protocol, he demonstrated an understanding that relationships, whether personal or professional, required both authenticity and integrity. This delicate equilibrium was a hallmark of his leadership, one that inspired confidence, loyalty, and respect among friends and colleagues alike. As preparations for departure to the theater began, Lincoln's farewells became more poignant. The shadows of the night seemed longer, the weight of imminent separation pressing gently yet persistently. He expressed gratitude to each individual, acknowledging contributions that had been vital to the preservation of the Union and the well-being of the nation. His gestures were subtle but profound, a touch on the shoulder, a quiet word of thanks, an earnest glance, each conveying appreciation, trust, and recognition of shared history. Even in these final moments, Lincoln's thoughts were expansive. He reflected on the fragility of life, the unpredictable course of events, and the enduring importance of relationships forged in trust, shared struggle, and mutual respect. The farewells were simultaneously temporal and eternal, temporal in their immediacy, eternal in the moral and historical resonance they carried. For those who witnessed them, the moments were imbued with a sense of significance that transcended ordinary social interaction, offering a window into the profound humanity of a leader who balanced immense responsibility with deep empathy. Lincoln's departure from the study and the White House that night was marked by dignity, solemnity, and a quiet resolve. Friends and colleagues remained behind, reflecting on the evening's exchanges, aware that they had participated in moments of both historical and personal consequence. Lincoln, walking with measured steps toward the carriage that would take him to Ford's Theater, embodied the convergence of private reflection, public duty, and moral courage. Every interaction, every farewell had contributed to a tapestry of connection and purpose, reinforcing the principles that had guided him and would endure beyond the confines of the evening. In retrospect, the farewells were more than social niceties. They were a testament to the humanity, wisdom, and foresight that defined Lincoln's leadership. They underscored the interdependence of personal relationships and public service, the necessity of empathy in the exercise of authority, and the enduring power of gratitude, respect, and moral clarity. In the quiet of the White House, amidst the flicker of candlelight and the weight of history, Lincoln's engagements with friends and colleagues revealed a man attuned to both the challenges of governance and the significance of human connection. The evening ended as it had begun, quietly, thoughtfully, and with the weight of history pressing gently upon all present. Lincoln's farewells, though spoken in low tones and small gestures, carried profound significance. They were the culmination of years of shared struggle, the acknowledgement of trust and loyalty, and the recognition that even in times of extraordinary responsibility, personal connection remained vital. The bonds reinforced that night would resonate far beyond the walls of the White House, shaping the nation's path and the memory of its 16th president. As the carriage doors closed and Lincoln departed, those left behind felt the quiet gravity of the moment. They had witnessed the interplay of leadership and humanity, the blending of public duty with private regard, and the expression of gratitude that elevated ordinary interactions into acts of historical significance. In the quiet of the White House, amidst the flicker of candlelight and the weight of history, Lincoln's engagements with friends and colleagues revealed a man attuned to both the challenges of governance and the significance of human connection.
The evening had settled over Washington with a gentle quiet, broken only by the soft murmurs of the city streets and the distant clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages. Within the White House, a different kind of sound filled the rooms, the rustle of papers, the low murmur of voices, and increasingly the laughter that punctuated moments of respite. Abraham Lincoln, often characterized by his solemnity in public, now allowed himself a rare indulgence, the lightness of conversation, the humor of memory, and the warmth of human connection. Mary Todd Lincoln had orchestrated a small gathering that evening, bringing together close friends, aides, and members of the household. The purpose was simple: to enjoy one another's company before the next day's affairs and, unknowingly, before the fateful events that would soon unfold. Yet there was no awareness of tragedy in the air,
only the quiet tension of a nation recently freed from war and the personal relief of a family and a president sharing moments of levity. Lincoln, seated comfortably in his favorite chair by the fire, allowed himself to lean back, unburdened if only briefly. His tall frame seemed to relax as he listened to the playful chatter of the room. The gathering was intimate but vibrant, a contrast to the weighty deliberations of the day. Mary, ever vivacious, guided the conversation with gentle humor, encouraging stories, recollections, and reflections that would draw smiles and laughter from all present. It was a scene rarely witnessed by the public, a president surrounded by joy, engaging with warmth, wit, and a lightness of spirit that spoke to the human man beneath the office's immense responsibility. Lincoln began to recount stories from his youth in Illinois, tales of misadventures, courtroom anecdotes, and humorous encounters from his early political life. His voice, deep and resonant, carried the cadence of someone who had learned the power of narrative, not merely to inform, but to entertain and connect. Those who listened, friends, aides, and family alike, leaned forward with rapt attention, caught between amusement and admiration for the man who could command both laughter and respect in a single remark. The laughter was unrestrained at times, spilling from one corner of the room to another. Even the sternest of aides, accustomed to the gravity of policy and the pressures of civil conflict, allowed themselves the indulgence of mirth. Lincoln's humor was never frivolous. It was rooted in keen observation, gentle irony, and a profound understanding of human nature. He could illuminate the absurdities of life, the quirks of human behavior, and the contradictions of society, all while fostering camaraderie and unity among those present. Mary Todd Lincoln, fully aware of her husband's rare moments of relaxation, contributed her own charm and wit. She teased and encouraged, laughed and coaxed, creating a rhythm that allowed both levity and intimacy to flourish. The couple's interactions revealed a dynamic of mutual affection and understanding, a shared history marked by trials, grief, and enduring love. In these moments, the White House felt less like a seat of government and more like a home, alive with the warmth of familial and social connection. Lincoln also turned the conversation toward broader reflections, weaving humor with insight. He spoke of political rivals, not with malice, but with an appreciation for the complexity of human ambition and folly. Observations on local politicians, anecdotes of legislative missteps, and the occasional witty remark about his own reputation drew laughter, nods, and thoughtful smiles. These exchanges were not mere entertainment, they were subtle lessons in humility, empathy, and the navigation of public life with integrity and grace. The children, Robert and Tad Lincoln, added their own energy to the gathering. Tad, with youthful exuberance, interrupted stories with questions, exclamations, or laughter, while Robert offered more thoughtful comments and reflections. Lincoln responded with patience and warmth, drawing them into anecdotes, moral lessons, and playful banter alike. These interactions underscored a critical aspect of his character. Despite the weight of the presidency, he remained attentive, present, and engaged as a father, valuing the fleeting moments of familial joy that often escaped notice in the shadow of duty. Amidst the laughter and light conversation, Lincoln's mind remained subtly alert. The weight of responsibility never fully departed, even in moments of levity. He listened carefully, absorbed the nuances of discourse, and occasionally interjected with remarks that reminded listeners of the depth of his thought, even when couched in humor. This blend of lightheartedness and keen perception created an atmosphere that was both joyful and intellectually engaging, a testament to Lincoln's rare ability to harmonize the personal, the social, and the reflective. Friends and aides who had accompanied Lincoln throughout the trials of war
found in this evening a moment of reprieve. Conversations flowed from humorous recollections to observations about the nation's recovery, stories of soldiers' idiosyncrasies, the absurdities encountered in political negotiations, and the occasional humorous anecdote from the press elicited laughter and camaraderie. Lincoln, with his signature wit, guided these exchanges with a deft hand, allowing levity to flourish without diminishing the gravity of the lives and experiences being discussed. The atmosphere of light conversation extended beyond spoken words. Gestures, glances, and shared smiles carried meaning, reinforcing bonds forged in shared struggle. Even minor moments, a raised eyebrow, a playful comment, or an affectionate glance, were laden with the warmth of human connection. Lincoln's awareness of these subtleties demonstrated his deep understanding of the social fabric that underpinned both personal relationships and effective leadership. He knew that laughter and joy were not mere diversions, they were essential to resilience, trust, and unity. At times, the conversation drifted into storytelling of imagined scenarios, parodies of public figures, and gentle exaggerations of daily life. Lincoln, with a twinkle in his eye, would amplify the humor, drawing chuckles from all corners. Yet beneath the levity lay keen observations of human behavior, social dynamics, and the absurdities of political life. This duality, humor layered with insight, was emblematic of Lincoln's approach to both personal interaction and leadership, engaging, instructive, and profoundly human. As the evening progressed, Lincoln's laughter became a bridge connecting past, present, and future. He recounted stories from the early days of his legal practice, reflecting on mistakes, misunderstandings, and unexpected successes. Each anecdote was infused with humility and humor, illustrating lessons learned while fostering connection with his audience. Listeners were drawn not only to the amusement, but to the wisdom embedded in each tale, gaining insight into the resilience, patience, and moral clarity that defined his character. Mary's presence remained central, her laughter mingling with Lincoln's, her gestures encouraging interaction, and her warmth providing a stabilizing influence. Together, they navigated the delicate balance between levity and reflection, ensuring that the evening was marked not merely by amusement, but by a shared sense of human connection, appreciation, and mutual respect. Their partnership, visible even in these fleeting moments, embodied a union of intellect, empathy, and emotional fortitude. Lincoln also took moments to address individuals personally, engaging in quiet conversation that combined inquiry, reflection, and gentle humor. He asked after families, shared observations on current events, and offered counsel with a tone both kind and deliberate. These personal exchanges, though seemingly minor, reinforced bonds of trust, loyalty, and respect. They reflected his understanding that leadership extended beyond the office into the realm of personal relationship, moral engagement, and the cultivation of a supportive community. The children, meanwhile, contributed to the liveliness of the gathering. Tad's exuberance occasionally interrupted stories, while Robert's thoughtful remarks prompted discussion and reflection. Lincoln responded with patience, warmth, and inclusion, ensuring that the conversation remained dynamic yet anchored in shared experience. In doing so, he reinforced the interplay between public responsibility and private connection, demonstrating the enduring value of familial bonds amid the pressures of leadership. As the hours deepened, the tone of the evening gradually shifted toward introspection, though humor and light conversation continued to punctuate the night. Lincoln's reflections on the war, the fragile peace, and the responsibilities that lay ahead were interwoven seamlessly with anecdotes, jokes, and playful commentary. This blending of the serious and the light-hearted characterized his unique approach to leadership and social interaction, allowing both resilience and humanity to coexist in a space often dominated by the weight of office. Even as laughter filled the room, Lincoln remained acutely aware of the fleeting nature of the evening. The night's joys, he knew, were ephemeral. Tomorrow would bring duties, responsibilities, and challenges. Yet in this interlude, he embraced the human need for connection, the restorative power of humor, and the moral and emotional sustenance provided by shared experience. These moments, though seemingly ordinary, were profound in their affirmation of life, resilience, and relational depth. As the gathering began to wind down, Lincoln's attention turned to Mary and the children, ensuring that the household was settled, comfortable, and content. His final remarks to friends and aides were marked with warmth, gratitude, and gentle humor, acknowledging the value of companionship and the shared endurance of trying times. The evening concluded not with solemnity, but with the lingering echoes of laughter, the soft glow of candlelight, and the quiet satisfaction of connection well nurtured. The night of light conversation and laughter, though fleeting, was emblematic of Lincoln's remarkable ability to balance the gravitas of leadership with the humanity of personal interaction. In these hours, he demonstrated that joy, humor, and relational warmth were not luxuries, but essential elements of resilience, empathy, and moral clarity. Those present would remember the evening not only for its amusement, but for the profound humanity, insight, and dignity that Lincoln embodied. As the household settled into quiet, Lincoln allowed himself a private moment of reflection. The laughter and conversation of the evening had renewed his spirit, offering a subtle but crucial fortification against the demands of leadership, the burdens of responsibility, and the uncertainties of the nation's future. In this balance between levity and solemnity, he reaffirmed the essential truth that even in times of immense pressure, the human heart, nourished by connection, humor, and love, remained capable of sustaining vision, courage, and hope.
The evening had arrived quietly over Washington, a gentle hush settling across the city after months of turmoil. The Civil War was formally over, but the nation remained fragile, its wounds fresh, its people weary. Within the walls of the White House, however, a different kind of atmosphere prevailed. The tension of governance, the weight of responsibility, and the burdens of history had, at least for a few hours, been set aside. Tonight, Abraham Lincoln allowed himself to inhabit a space of levity, warmth, and human connection, a rare reprieve from the constant demands of office. Mary Todd Lincoln had arranged a small gathering that evening, inviting close family, aides, and trusted friends to join in light conversation. The purpose was simple: a chance to share stories, laughter, and companionship before the next day's inevitable duties. The event was not formal, not a political gathering, but a private haven where Lincoln could be, in small moments, simply Abraham Lincoln, a husband, a father, and a friend. Lincoln settled into his favorite chair near the fire, a tall, imposing figure softened by the glow of candlelight. His tall frame, usually rigid with the weight of responsibility, seemed to relax as the chatter of familiar voices surrounded him. Laughter, spontaneous and warm, filled the room. The president's usual solemnity gave way to amusement and delight as he listened to jokes, recalled anecdotes, and occasionally interjected his own stories with timing precise enough to draw hearty laughter from all corners. Mary Todd Lincoln moved gracefully among the guests, her voice a gentle guide, her laughter infectious. She coaxed stories from hesitant friends, shared playful observations, and encouraged a spirit of camaraderie.
The interplay between husband and wife, evident to all in attendance, was natural and easy. Lincoln, though reserved by nature, responded with warmth and humor, his quick wit complementing Mary's vivacity. Together, they created an atmosphere in which conversation flowed freely, and joy, however fleeting, was abundant. Lincoln began to recount tales from his youth in Illinois. He spoke of misadventures on the frontier, humorous encounters in courts, and the occasional absurdity of politics. His voice carried a rhythm that made even the simplest story captivating. Friends and aides leaned forward, smiles on their faces, enjoying both the humor and the insight woven into each tale. It was remarkable, they thought, that a man so weighed by the cares of office could, with ease, transport an audience into moments of laughter and reflection. Laughter rose naturally in response to Lincoln's stories. He had a talent for highlighting the human quirks in everyday life, the missteps of politicians, the stubbornness of certain townsfolk, the foibles of those who sought to deceive or flatter him. Yet his humor was never cruel. Instead, it carried wisdom, humility, and an awareness of the frailties that united all people. The room, filled with those accustomed to somber deliberation and the pressures of public service, now resonated with warmth, camaraderie, and a shared sense of delight. The children, Robert and Tad Lincoln, contributed to the lightness of the evening. Tad, with boundless energy, interrupted stories with spontaneous remarks, giggles, and playful antics, while Robert offered thoughtful observations that prompted discussion and occasionally subtle humor. Lincoln responded with patience and encouragement, drawing them into anecdotes and guiding their participation with care. These interactions revealed a side of Lincoln rarely witnessed in the public eye, a father attentive, loving, and fully present in the small moments that defined family life. Mary encouraged conversation about lighter matters, recent visitors, the comical habits of household staff, and small domestic misadventures. Lincoln joined with subtle jokes, playful commentary, and gentle observations, creating a rhythm that balanced levity with thoughtfulness. Even as laughter filled the room, he remained keenly aware of the weight of leadership, subtly integrating reflections on resilience, human nature, and shared values into the dialogue. The aides and friends present, many of whom had endured the trials of war alongside Lincoln, found in this evening a rare opportunity for relief. Conversation ranged from humorous recollections of soldiers' quirks to the absurdities encountered in politics and governance. Lincoln skillfully facilitated, allowing each voice to contribute to the atmosphere while ensuring the humor remained inclusive, respectful, and illuminating. Through it all, his ability to blend insight with amusement left an indelible impression, reminding all present of the humanity that underlay great leadership. Lincoln also used moments of humor to convey subtle moral lessons. A story about a stubborn politician or a mismanaged court case might elicit laughter, but also prompt reflection on honesty, patience, and empathy. In this way, amusement and instruction intertwined seamlessly, demonstrating Lincoln's belief that humor could educate as effectively as solemn discourse, and that light-hearted conversation itself was a tool for nurturing understanding, trust, and unity. The evening progressed with shared stories of the past, reflections on human folly, and gentle teasing that drew chuckles throughout the room. Lincoln's observations, delivered with characteristic precision, illuminated the absurdities of human behavior without diminishing the dignity of those involved. Listeners found themselves laughing while simultaneously reflecting on the subtle truths embedded in each narrative, a testament to the unique depth of Lincoln's humor and intellect. Mary Todd Lincoln ensured that the atmosphere remained comfortable and engaging. Her laughter, guidance and participation reinforced the sense of familial intimacy and social warmth. She encouraged the children to join in, guided the conversation with charm and tact, and fostered moments in which Lincoln could share personal stories, gentle jokes, and insights with friends and aides alike. Their partnership created a space where levity, affection, and reflection coexisted harmoniously, revealing a household alive with intelligence, humor, and human warmth.
Lincoln's humor was also a bridge between generations. Through playful commentary, storytelling, and anecdotes, he connected young and old, family and staff, colleagues and friends. These interactions reinforced bonds, promoted shared understanding, and offered subtle lessons in civility, patience, and moral discernment. In the process, the evening became a microcosm of the reconciliation and unity he hoped for the nation, a blend of amusement, empathy, and reflection. As the night deepened, the conversation occasionally turned toward more serious topics, though always with a light touch. Lincoln reflected on human resilience, the absurdities of politics, and the enduring necessity of empathy and patience in leadership. Humor, he understood, could illuminate truth without diminishing gravity. It could foster connection without erasing responsibility. In this balance, the evening achieved a remarkable harmony, blending personal relief, social engagement, and subtle moral instruction. Even amidst laughter, Lincoln's attentiveness remained sharp. He noted who spoke little, encouraged quiet participants, and offered subtle affirmations to each individual. These actions revealed a profound awareness of the human need for acknowledgement, inclusion, and respect, an understanding that extended both to personal relationships and to the governance of a nation still fragile from conflict. The children's laughter echoed across the room, mingling with Lincoln's deep chuckles and the gentle amusement of adults. Tad's energetic interjections, Robert's thoughtful commentary, and the friendly banter of friends created a dynamic rhythm that enlivened the household. Lincoln engaged fully, responding with warmth, patience, and wit, demonstrating that leadership encompassed not only public command, but also the cultivation of joy, empathy, and human connection. Stories of past campaigns, courtroom victories and failures, and humorous encounters with friends and adversaries filled the room. Each tale was carefully framed, blending amusement with subtle reflection, encouraging laughter while highlighting lessons in integrity, patience, and human nature. Listeners responded with both delight and contemplation, experiencing the interplay of humor, insight, and moral resonance that characterized Lincoln's unique approach to conversation and engagement. As the night wore on, moments of quiet reflection interspersed the laughter. Lincoln paused, considering the fleeting nature of joy, the fragility of life, and the responsibilities that awaited him in the days to come. Yet these pauses never diminished the evening's warmth. Rather, they provided contrast, underscoring the preciousness of human connection, the restorative power of laughter, and the subtle affirmation that even in times of great pressure, moments of levity and companionship remained vital to personal and collective resilience. Mary Todd Lincoln ensured that the evening concluded with a sense of warmth and satisfaction. She gathered the children, thanked friends for their company, and offered Lincoln an affectionate glance that conveyed both pride and relief. Lincoln, in turn, expressed quiet gratitude to each individual, acknowledging the joy, support, and shared experiences that had marked the evening. These gestures, understated yet profound, reinforced the bonds that underpinned both family and community, highlighting the essential humanity behind the office of the president. The final moments were quiet and intimate. Laughter subsided, stories concluded,
and the household settled into calm. Lincoln lingered briefly by the fire, reflecting on the evening, the company, and the delicate balance of humor and responsibility that had defined the gathering. The night had been more than amusement, it had been nourishment for the spirit, a subtle reinforcement of resilience, and a reminder of the enduring importance of connection, empathy, and joy. As the household lights dimmed and the city of Washington rested, Lincoln allowed himself the rare indulgence of peace. The evening of light conversation and laughter had offered a temporary reprieve from the burdens of leadership, a space in which human warmth and humor had flourished, and a quiet affirmation of the value of companionship in both personal and public life. In these fleeting hours, the president's humanity, wisdom, and empathy shone vividly, leaving a lasting impression on all who shared in the evening's gentle joy.
The night had settled over Washington with a stillness that felt heavier than usual. A thin wind rustled the branches of the trees outside the White House, carrying the faint chill of early spring, and shadows stretched long across the corridors. Inside, Abraham Lincoln moved quietly through the halls, aware of an intangible weight pressing upon the air. The evening had begun like any other, letters read, aides consulted, family attended. Yet there was something ineffable in the mood, a subtle whisper of unease that neither time nor duty could dispel. Lincoln paused by a window, looking out over the darkened city. The lamplight flickered, casting uncertain reflections on the glass. He did not speak, but in the solitude of that moment, a series of quiet thoughts and intuitions pressed upon him. These were not formal warnings, nor had any specific event suggested imminent danger. Rather, they were the subtle sense of foreboding that sometimes accompanies great responsibility, a combination of instinct, intuition, and the awareness of vulnerability that comes with leadership. Earlier in the evening, a letter had arrived from a friend, congratulatory in tone, yet tinged with a note of concern. The words lingered in Lincoln's mind, more for their undertone than their content. The correspondence reminded him of the precariousness of peace, the fragility of human intention, and the lingering resentment that could erupt from unforeseen quarters. Even in celebration, in laughter and light conversation, Lincoln had felt an undercurrent of tension, a quiet portent of the uncertainties that the nation still harbored. He walked slowly through the library, his hand brushing the spines of books he had long read and reread. The familiar titles, the weight of history in their pages, offered a kind of solace. Yet even among these companions of thought, Lincoln could not escape the whisper of unease. He reflected on past warnings, subtle patterns in events, and coincidences that, while explainable in rational terms, seemed to carry a symbolic weight in the quiet of the night. The mind of a president, shaped by years of crisis, war, and moral deliberation, was particularly sensitive to these currents, attuned to what might befall the nation and to the fragile thread upon which safety rested. A flicker from the fireplace illuminated the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lincoln's gaze lingered on the light and dark interplay, his mind tracing the symbolic resonance, light and darkness, peace and conflict, hope and despair. Each shadow seemed to whisper a reminder of the tenuous balance between order and chaos, the fine line that separated stability from disaster. Though he had faced death and danger before, on battlefields, in debates, and in the chambers of government, this was different. The portents were subtle, quiet, yet persistent, echoing the weight of the night and the frailty of human foresight. Mary Todd Lincoln entered the room quietly, her presence gentle yet perceptive. She noticed the solemnity of his expression and offered a word of reassurance. "Abraham, you carry so much, but do not let the shadows of worry darken this evening," she said softly.
Lincoln acknowledged her words with a nod, but the quiet sense of unease did not entirely lift. He shared with her, in fragments, the sensations he could not name, the small disturbances that seemed significant only in their accumulation. Mary listened attentively, aware that her husband's intuition had never been trivial, that his instincts often preceded events in ways others could not comprehend. As the night deepened, Lincoln's mind wandered through the events of the day, the weeks past, and the larger trajectory of history. He considered the tenuous peace just established after years of civil conflict, the simmering resentments that persisted in towns and fields across the nation, and the challenges of guiding a country still fractured along lines of ideology, race, and personal loss. In these reflections, the quiet portents gained clarity, not as direct threats, but as symbolic markers of the delicate equilibrium upon which the nation rested. A sudden knock at the door startled him momentarily, reminding him of the constant vigilance his role required. A young aide entered with a report, polite yet urgent in tone. Lincoln read the document carefully, noting minor irregularities, unusual patterns of correspondence, and subtle tensions among military officers recently demobilized. Though nothing overtly alarming was present, the observations reinforced the intuitive sense of unease that had accompanied him through the evening. The omens were not explicit, they were signals, patterns, and intimations, subtle enough to be dismissed, but impossible for Lincoln to ignore entirely. He returned to his chair near the fire, resting his elbows on his knees and folding his hands thoughtfully. Lincoln reflected on the philosophical implications of omens, intuition, and the human mind's capacity to perceive threats before they become tangible. Throughout his life, he had relied on judgment, observation, and instinct in moments of critical decision. Now, in the quiet of the White House night, these faculties seemed to converge, heightening his awareness of the unseen, the unknown, and the inevitable uncertainties that lay ahead. Outside, the wind stirred once more, rattling the windows and carrying with it the faintest echo of the city beyond. Lincoln considered the symbolic weight of natural phenomena, the subtle signs that generations had historically associated with warning or fate. Though he did not attribute supernatural power to such occurrences, he understood that human psychology and intuition often combined to recognize patterns invisible to casual observation. In leadership, these quiet insights could mean the difference between action and inaction, preparedness and vulnerability. The household was mostly still, though faint sounds of servants moving about, the distant laughter of children, and the subtle creaks of the old building punctuated the night. Lincoln's mind, sharpened by experience, filtered these minor disruptions. Each unusual sound was catalogued and analyzed. The omens were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet persistent, a delicate drumbeat of caution beneath the evening's calm. Lincoln's reflections wandered to human mortality, the impermanence of life, and the ethical weight of leadership. Subtle portents, he realized, were reminders not merely of external danger, but of the fragility of all human endeavor. They were invitations to vigilance, introspection, and moral preparation. He considered his own limitations, the burdens of the presidency, and the responsibility he bore not only for policy and law, but for the collective well-being of a nation poised on the threshold of peace. He thought of soldiers returning home, families rebuilding, and communities attempting to reconcile with recent devastation. Each scenario carried potential for renewal, but also for hidden dangers, resentment, violence, miscommunication. Lincoln's mind cataloged these possibilities with meticulous care, balancing optimism with caution. The omens of the night, subtle and quiet, were intertwined with the tangible responsibilities he could address, a call to mindfulness, prudence and moral vigilance. Mary entered once more, offering tea and a gentle word of comfort. She did not attempt to dispel the unease, recognizing that it was part of her husband's nature to contemplate such portents. They shared a quiet moment by the fire, speaking softly of daily matters and family. Yet the conversation inevitably returned to the larger sense of caution, the awareness of unseen currents, and the responsibility that Lincoln carried. Their dialogue was a blend of intimacy, mutual respect, and recognition that some concerns could not be wholly articulated, only acknowledged. Lincoln walked to the window again, gazing at the dark expanse of the Potomac. The river reflected the flickering lights of distant homes and the occasional street lamp. He considered history's cycles, the interplay of fate and human choice, and the ways in which subtle signs often preceded monumental events. Even in peace, the shadows of conflict lingered, and the omens of caution reminded him that vigilance was never optional. Leadership required sensitivity not only to immediate threats, but to the quiet, invisible currents that shaped human behavior and destiny. He recalled moments from his life when intuition had guided decisions, from debates in Illinois to the delicate maneuvering of wartime strategy. The quiet portents of the night were, in essence, a continuation of this awareness, a subtle reinforcement that history was never neutral, and that perception, preparation, and moral clarity were essential to navigating its currents. Lincoln reflected on the weight of foresight, the responsibility of insight, and the thin line between action guided by prudence and inaction born of negligence. The night deepened, and shadows lengthened across the room. Lincoln remained near the fire, thoughtful and introspective, allowing the quiet portents to guide his reflections. He contemplated the nation's fragile peace, the enduring human struggles for justice and equity, and the moral imperatives that would define his remaining days. Each subtle sensation, each minor disturbance became part of a tapestry of awareness, reinforcing the importance of humility, vigilance, and ethical responsibility. Even as he prepared to retire for the evening, Lincoln's mind remained alert, cataloging the impressions, signals, and intuitions that had characterized the night. The omens were quiet, subtle, and often intangible, yet their significance was profound. They reminded him of the fragility of human life, the unpredictability of events, and the necessity of moral fortitude in the face of uncertainty. For a man of Lincoln's insight, these quiet portents were not sources of fear, but guides toward careful thought, ethical reflection, and prudent action. By the late hours, the household was silent. Lincoln stood once more by the window, gazing at the moonlit city. The omens and quiet portents of the evening coalesced into a subtle awareness of vulnerability, responsibility, and moral necessity. He allowed himself a deep breath, recognizing that vigilance, contemplation, and reflection were as vital to leadership as courage and decisiveness. The night's quiet reminders were absorbed, cataloged, and integrated into the complex consciousness of a man bearing the burdens of a nation's fragile future. In the stillness, Lincoln finally returned to his chair, resting for a moment before sleep, the fire's glow flickering across his face. He had acknowledged the subtle warnings, reflected on the imperatives of duty, and internalized the moral and practical lessons whispered by the night. The quiet portents were neither ignored nor overestimated. They were recognized as part of the delicate balance between intuition and reason, vulnerability and strength, foresight and responsibility. As the house finally settled into stillness, Lincoln's thoughts lingered on the interplay of light and shadow, peace and tension, life and mortality. The omens of the evening, subtle though persistent, remained a quiet companion, a reminder that even in tranquility, vigilance was a moral obligation. In these hours of contemplation, Abraham Lincoln's extraordinary capacity for insight, empathy, and foresight shone clearly, revealing a man uniquely attuned to the moral and practical dimensions of leadership on the eve of history's pivotal moments.
The White House was unusually still that evening. The glow of oil lamps and the flicker of the fireplace cast soft shadows across the rooms, lending the familiar corridors a quiet intimacy that belied the weight of history. Abraham Lincoln moved deliberately through the hallways, each step measured yet contemplative. Though the day had been filled with the usual consultations, letters, and minor interruptions, this hour was different. It was a liminal moment, a threshold between the duties of the day and the unknown events awaiting him. Mary Todd Lincoln was nearby, arranging the few final items for the evening. She moved with gentle precision, placing wraps, gloves, and documents where they would be needed. The children, Robert and Tad, were already tucked away for the night, though Tad's occasional giggle and soft footsteps reminded the household of their presence. For Lincoln, the quiet of the empty rooms offered a rare space to reflect, to consider the night ahead, and to engage in the ritual of small personal farewells before departing. He paused in his study, standing by the window and looking out across the dimly lit grounds. The city lay calm, but calmness was a fragile illusion. Washington, he knew, had been shaped by conflict, divided loyalties, and fragile human hearts. The peace achieved after years of war was tenuous, and the responsibilities of leadership weighed heavily. Yet in this private moment, Lincoln allowed himself to breathe, to center his thoughts, and to acknowledge the significance of the evening in both personal and national terms. A quiet knock at the door announced the arrival of John Hay, his devoted private secretary. Hay entered with careful discretion, his expression respectful yet observant. Lincoln acknowledged him with a nod and a faint smile, gesturing for him to approach. The two men exchanged brief words regarding the plans for the evening, confirming the carriage arrangements, timing, and anticipated company at the theater. Yet amidst these logistical exchanges, there was a deeper, unspoken layer of companionship, a trust born of shared responsibility, of understanding the burdens and vulnerabilities unique to those who walk closely with power. Mary entered the room again, her presence a gentle anchor amidst the growing anticipation. She offered her hand, which Lincoln took briefly, a gesture of intimacy, reassurance, and partnership. Their eyes met in a silent conversation, a reflection of the depth of their bond and of the unspoken acknowledgement of the responsibilities and uncertainties that lay ahead. There was no need for words. The shared history, the trials endured together, and the unspoken fears communicated volumes in a simple glance. Lincoln moved to his desk and collected a few essential papers and letters, placing them carefully in his coat pocket. Each item held significance, whether administrative or personal, a small testament to the duties he carried and the relationships he valued. There was a deliberate calm in his actions, an awareness that these preparations were both practical and symbolic, marking the transition from private reflection to public engagement. A final glance around the room revealed the subtle signs of life and continuity, the framed photographs, the books, the personal mementos that grounded him in family, memory, and the enduring human experience. Lincoln lingered for a moment, as though drawing strength from these silent witnesses,
aware that the responsibilities of the office were inseparable from the personal world he cherished and protected. He descended the staircase slowly, each step echoing lightly in the stillness. Household staff moved quietly to adjust carriage arrangements, check lanterns, and ensure that the route to Ford's Theater was prepared. Lincoln greeted them with soft acknowledgement, his tall figure imposing yet imbued with gentle presence. Even in these brief interactions, his attention to detail, empathy, and awareness of human dignity were evident. Each word and gesture was precise, thoughtful, and considerate, a reflection of a leader attuned to both practical necessity and personal connection. Outside, the carriage awaited, its polished surfaces reflecting the soft glow of lamps and lanterns. Lincoln approached, pausing to adjust his coat and ensure that Mary's preparations were complete. A momentary pause allowed him to survey the quiet streets, the distant shadows of the city, and the air that carried both promise and uncertainty. These final minutes were charged with reflection, an awareness of transition, and the subtle tension that accompanies all departures, whether for routine engagements or moments that would unknowingly become historic. John Hay stepped forward to assist, offering guidance with the habitual deference that had defined their professional relationship. Lincoln accepted silently, moving with the practiced ease of one who had navigated countless public appearances, yet remained grounded in the gravity of personal ritual. The carriage door closed, the horses shifted nervously, and the final moments within the White House were drawn into memory. The quiet anticipation, the soft farewells, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the night's importance. Inside the carriage, Lincoln seated himself with deliberate care, adjusting the folds of his coat and the hat upon his head. The rhythmic clop of the horses on the cobblestones provided a steady cadence, a physical reminder of movement, progress, and the passage of time. Mary Todd Lincoln observed him closely, offering gentle reassurance and an affectionate glance, aware that the weight he carried extended beyond the immediate journey to encompass the responsibilities of a nation and the fragility of life. The streets were calm, lined sparsely with the occasional carriage or pedestrian. Lanterns cast shifting pools of light on the cobblestones, illuminating the reflective surface of the road and the fleeting shadows of buildings. Lincoln's thoughts wandered through the day's events, the recent months of war and reconciliation, and the fragile steps toward national healing. Each pause, each flicker of light seemed imbued with symbolism, a reminder of the tenuous balance between order and chaos, vigilance and repose. In these moments, Lincoln reflected upon the human dimensions of leadership, the necessity of patience, compassion, and foresight. He considered the soldiers returning home, families reconciling loss, and communities striving for unity. Each consideration carried a weight that was both personal and national, a testament to the intertwined nature of private thought and public duty. The carriage's gentle motion allowed him to meditate on these matters, providing space for quiet introspection amid movement toward an event that would unknowingly become a historic moment. Hay's presence remained steady, offering subtle guidance, observing the street ahead, and ensuring the carriage followed the proper course. Lincoln's attention, though focused, remained engaged with the world outside the windows, the lamplight, the patterns of movement, the interplay of shadows, and the quiet hum of the city at night. Each detail, no matter how minor, was catalogued by a mind accustomed to vigilance, foresight, and the constant assessment of both danger and opportunity. Mary Todd Lincoln spoke softly, breaking the reflective silence with gentle conversation. She commented on the quiet beauty of the night, the soft glow of the city, and the small comforts of domestic routine. Lincoln responded with subtle wit, drawing a faint smile, a brief laugh, and a shared sense of connection that transcended the ordinary. Even in these moments, his humanity and attentiveness were evident, reminding all present that leadership was inseparable from empathy, reflection, and relational presence. The carriage approached the theater district, the familiar streets lined with occasional passers-by, and the glow of lanterns reflected in shop windows. Lincoln's gaze remained steady, aware of the practical details of travel, the anticipation of public engagement, and the underlying weight of symbolic presence that accompanied his movements. Each step, each street corner, was observed with care, blending logistical awareness with moral and personal consideration. As they neared Ford's Theater, Lincoln's thoughts became more intimate, more reflective. He considered the significance of the evening, the performances awaiting him, and the subtle importance of presence in both public and private life. These final moments before departure were imbued with a mix of anticipation, reflection, and quiet awareness of responsibility, the delicate interweaving of personal humanity and the symbolic weight of leadership. The horses slowed, approaching the entrance to the theater, and the carriage came to a gentle stop. Lincoln gathered his coat, hat, and papers, preparing to disembark. Mary offered a final word of encouragement, a gesture of love and reassurance, and a silent hope that the night would pass without incident. Lincoln's acknowledgment was subtle but profound, a nod of gratitude, a quiet smile, and an inward readiness for the moments ahead. He stepped from the carriage, tall and composed, adjusting his coat with careful hands. The pavement beneath his feet carried the sound of quiet footsteps and the faint echoes of history, though neither he nor those around him could have comprehended the magnitude of what the evening would soon entail. Yet even unaware of the impending tragedy, Lincoln moved with dignity, mindfulness, and the awareness of the symbolic and practical significance of each step, each gesture, and each moment of presence. Inside the theater, attendants guided the Lincoln party to their seats. The ambiance of the performance, the gentle murmur of other patrons, and the soft lighting created an atmosphere both ordinary and extraordinary, a stage upon which public life and private humanity intersected. Lincoln's focus, though partly on the performance, remained attentive to those accompanying him, to the moral implications of visibility, and to the subtle responsibilities of representation that marked every public appearance. Mary Todd Lincoln, seated beside him, observed quietly. Her awareness of the symbolic weight of the evening, the personal significance of the performance, and the shared intimacy of the moment provided a counterbalance to the president's reflective disposition. She offered occasional words of light comment, encouraging engagement with the performance and the company, fostering a balance between attentiveness and human connection that defined much of Lincoln's private interactions. The final moments before the curtain rose were marked by a deep, almost imperceptible stillness. Lincoln's posture, gaze, and subtle gestures reflected an internal balance, a readiness to inhabit the public moment while maintaining private reflection. The significance of the evening, though not yet fully realized, hovered as a quiet tension beneath the surface of ordinary activity. These last moments before departure, before the inevitable unfolding of history, were characterized by mindfulness, attentiveness, and the profound awareness of both human fragility and leadership responsibility.
The White House settled into an unusual quiet as evening fell across the city of Washington. The usual bustle of attendants and aides had given way to a more subdued rhythm. Candlelight flickered along the corridors,
casting long, gentle shadows on walls lined with portraits of past presidents and landscapes of the American countryside. Abraham Lincoln, the tall figure of the nation's leader, moved deliberately through these rooms, each step measured, as though aware of the gravity of the hours ahead. This was no ordinary evening. Though outwardly routine, a subtle tension lingered, woven into the very air of the house. Mary Todd Lincoln quietly moved about the private rooms, adjusting the final details for the evening's outing. She collected shawls, arranged wraps, and prepared letters and personal items to accompany her husband. There was a meticulousness in her movements, an unspoken understanding that these small actions held significance far beyond their practical purpose. The children had already been put to bed. Robert, mature beyond his years, had retired with a book, and young Tad's occasional giggle echoed faintly from upstairs, reminding the household of the tender normalcy Lincoln so treasured. Lincoln paused in his study, a space he favored for its solitude and familiarity. He stood beside the window and gazed out at the soft glow of street lamps and the dark silhouettes of trees swaying gently in the night breeze. The city appeared tranquil, yet Lincoln's mind was restless. He reflected on the day's correspondence, the decisions he had made, and the delicate state of the nation after 4 years of brutal civil conflict. Though the war had ended, peace remained fragile, and he knew all too well the work that still lay ahead. Yet tonight, these thoughts were mingled with an awareness of the evening's imminent social engagement and the private rituals that preceded it. A quiet knock on the study door announced John Hay, Lincoln's trusted private secretary. Hay entered with a measured step, his expression a blend of professionalism and subtle concern. Lincoln acknowledged him with a brief nod, inviting him to speak. The conversation that followed was practical, confirmation of carriage arrangements, timing, and the company expected at the theater. Yet beneath these details lay a shared, unspoken understanding, the recognition of the fragility of life, the weight of responsibility, and the intimacy of trust cultivated over years of close service. Mary Todd Lincoln returned to the room, her presence a stabilizing comfort. She offered a gentle smile, which Lincoln returned with understated warmth. Their eyes met in a quiet exchange, a conversation without words that conveyed both affection and acknowledgment of the seriousness of the evening. Though the world would see only the formal composure of the president, Mary understood the inner rhythms of his mind, the anticipation, responsibility, and subtle reflection that accompanied him even in the briefest of moments. Lincoln turned to his desk to gather the necessary items for departure, a few documents, letters of personal and official significance, and the small items that would accompany him to the theater. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, as he placed each piece carefully into the folds of his coat. These gestures, simple yet precise, marked the transition from private reflection to public engagement. They were gestures laden with meaning, both functional and symbolic, demonstrating the care with which he approached even routine activity. Before leaving, Lincoln allowed himself a moment to observe the room in its entirety. The photographs of family, the books he had read and reread, and the quiet objects that filled the study all grounded him in the personal sphere he cherished. These items, silent witnesses to his life and thought, provided solace, perspective, and a tangible reminder of the human dimensions of leadership. Even amidst the pressures of governance, Lincoln drew strength from this private world, a reservoir of stability in the uncertain currents of public duty. He descended the staircase slowly, the familiar wood creaking beneath his weight. Household staff moved quietly, attending to last-minute preparations, adjusting carriage lamps, ensuring the horses were ready, and checking the route to the theater. Lincoln greeted each with understated recognition, his long frame bending slightly in acknowledgement. Even in these small interactions, his presence carried dignity, attentiveness, and warmth, a reflection of his understanding of human dignity, regardless of rank or station. The carriage was awaiting outside, polished and prepared, the harnessed horses shifting nervously in response to their environment. Lincoln approached, pausing briefly to ensure that Mary's preparations were complete and that all details were attended to. The evening air carried a crisp chill, and he adjusted his coat carefully, a habitual motion reflecting both comfort and the discipline of personal appearance. These final moments before departure were marked by deliberate calm, a blend of readiness and quiet reflection that defined Lincoln's character. John Hay stepped forward, providing discreet assistance and guidance as the president entered the carriage. Lincoln seated himself with deliberate care, his tall form straight, his hands resting lightly upon his coat. The rhythmic clop of the horses on the cobblestones served as a grounding cadence, a physical reminder of movement and passage through space and time. Mary Todd Lincoln sat beside him, her presence a quiet reassurance, her glances gentle yet aware of the weight of the moment. The streets of Washington were calm, the occasional pedestrian or carriage casting fleeting shadows under the lantern light. Lincoln's attention was divided between the practical navigation of the route and the subtler impressions of the city's rhythm, the interplay of light and shadow, the occasional flicker of reflection in windows, the muted echo of distant conversations. These observations, though minute, were catalogued by a mind accustomed to vigilance and foresight, a mind aware of the invisible currents that shaped public life and personal safety alike. Mary Todd Lincoln spoke softly, offering observations on the city, the weather, and the beauty of the night. Her voice was a comforting rhythm amid Lincoln's reflective silence. He responded with subtle wit, eliciting brief smiles and a quiet sense of connection. In these moments, private human interaction intertwined seamlessly with the larger context of public presence, demonstrating the balance Lincoln maintained between attentiveness to duty and attentiveness to personal relationships. The carriage moved steadily towards the theater district, the familiar streets lined with occasional shops and the soft glow of lanterns reflected on wet cobblestones. Lincoln's mind wandered to the theater itself, the performance awaiting them, the symbolic importance of public attendance, and the nature of his presence as a leader. Yet alongside these considerations ran private reflections, thoughts of family, memories of past decisions, and awareness of the intricate responsibilities he bore. Each passing street, each flicker of light, was observed and reflected upon, a meditation on both ordinary life and the weight of history. Upon nearing Ford's Theater, Lincoln's attention sharpened. He considered the logistical arrangements, the position of aides and attendants, and the need to maintain composure in public view. At the same time, he allowed himself a moment of personal introspection, a reflection on mortality, leadership, and the intersection of private thought and public expectation. These last moments before disembarking were as much a preparation of the mind and spirit as of the body, a quiet internal ritual marking the passage from private reflection to public engagement. The carriage slowed, and Lincoln adjusted his coat and hat with care. Mary Todd Lincoln offered a final word of encouragement and affection, a gesture laden with meaning. Though no one could have anticipated the tragedy that would follow, the moment was one of intimate connection, mutual understanding, and the quiet acknowledgement of the evening's significance. Lincoln's acknowledgement, a slight nod, a subtle smile, was a final private communication, bridging personal life with public duty.
Stepping onto the pavement, Lincoln moved with dignity, each motion deliberate. The sounds of the city, footsteps, the distant hum of conversation, the subtle creak of carriage wheels formed a backdrop to his final moments before entering the theater. Though unaware of the exact magnitude of what was to come, he carried himself with composure, mindfulness, and attentiveness to both his surroundings and the people accompanying him. Inside the theater, attendants guided the party to their designated seats. The ambiance was ordinary in some ways, the quiet murmur of other patrons, the soft illumination of the stage, and the anticipation of performance, but extraordinary in its symbolism. For Lincoln, the public and private realms intersected here. His posture, gaze, and subtle gestures reflected readiness, awareness, and presence, even as the full consequences of the evening remained unknowable. Mary Todd Lincoln remained a stabilizing presence, her attention attuned to the balance between engagement with the performance and observance of the president's reactions. She provided gentle commentary, ensured the children's comfort, and maintained the rhythm of human connection within the space. Their interactions, subtle and profound, demonstrated the delicate interplay of personal intimacy, public responsibility, and historical consciousness that characterized the evening. The final minutes before the curtain rose were marked by a stillness that carried weight. Lincoln's gaze swept the room, noting attendants, aides, and familiar faces, cataloging details as a leader accustomed to vigilance. The evening's significance, though not yet realized, hovered over the moment, infusing it with quiet tension, anticipation, and an unspoken sense of historical import. These last moments before the public engagement, before stepping fully into the space where personal and national trajectories converged, were reflective, deliberate, and imbued with profound humanity. Even as the audience murmured and the first strains of music sounded from the stage, Lincoln maintained composure. He adjusted his posture, ensured Mary and the children were comfortable, and engaged briefly with his aides, confirming the readiness of the evening. The quiet dignity of his presence, the mindfulness in each gesture, and the attentiveness to human relationships and circumstance reflected a leader simultaneously grounded, observant, and attuned to the unfolding moment. As the performance began, the last moments before departure, those transitions from the private to the public, from contemplation to engagement, stood as a testament to Lincoln's character. His awareness, attentiveness, and capacity for reflection, even in the face of impending history, were evident in each movement and glance. Though unseen by the larger world, these moments carried profound significance, the convergence of personal ritual, historical responsibility, and the humanity of a man who bore the weight of a nation's fragile peace.
The evening at Ford's Theater had begun like any other. The audience murmured softly, settling into their seats as the stage was set for performance. The theater, modest in size yet elegant in its arrangement, was illuminated by soft gas lamps, casting warm light on the faces of those gathered. Abraham Lincoln, seated in his box with Mary Todd Lincoln at his side and accompanied by attentive aides, observed quietly, his tall frame composed, yet attentive to every subtle movement in the room. The city outside had fallen into an uneasy calm, unaware of the drama about to unfold within these walls. The president's mind, even in the midst of anticipated entertainment, remained alert. His eyes scanned the audience, noting familiar faces among the patrons and recognizing subtle shifts in behavior. The war had ended months ago, yet tensions lingered like a low hum beneath society's surface. Lincoln, ever perceptive, understood the precariousness of both public safety and human intent. The theater, though a space for relaxation, was a place where observation was as essential as enjoyment.
He balanced awareness with a rare inclination for levity, even sharing quiet smiles with Mary at familiar jokes exchanged between them. Mary Todd Lincoln, sensing the gravity mingled with lightness, offered quiet encouragement and gentle conversation. She smiled at her husband, whose eyes, while attentive to the performance, carried the weight of reflective thought. Their children, Robert and Tad, sat quietly, observing the stage with innocence, unaware of the enormity of history converging around them. These final moments within the theater box were intimate and private, yet inevitably marked by the awareness that they were situated at the crossroads of personal life and public destiny. The actors moved onto the stage, and the performance commenced. The room's attention shifted to the unfolding drama, the dialogue rising and falling like waves across the attentive audience. Lincoln, however, maintained a dual focus, immersed in the narrative, yet subconsciously scanning the space, absorbing cues and noting the subtleties of human presence. This ability to attend simultaneously to detail and broader significance had been his hallmark as a leader. Even in apparent repose, his mind cataloged information, parsed behavior, and anticipated consequence. Minutes into the performance, a subtle disturbance rippled through the air. An unfamiliar figure moved with purpose near the box entrance. Lincoln's perception, honed by years of crisis and vigilance, registered the anomaly almost immediately. Though outwardly calm, his attention sharpened. The audience, engrossed in the play, remained oblivious to the impending danger. Lincoln's posture, still composed, reflected the fine balance between awareness and restraint, a testament to his lifelong ability to manage threat, perception, and the demands of presence simultaneously. The figure drew closer, and Lincoln's senses heightened. The mind of a president, trained in observation, noted gestures, clothing, and positioning with remarkable acuity. In that instant, historical events converged with personal fate. The tension in the air, imperceptible to others, was vivid in the perception of the man who bore the nation's responsibility. In this quiet yet monumental moment, the threads of leadership, mortality, and destiny intertwined. A sudden sound, a gunshot, shattered the fragile calm. Chaos erupted, screams mingling with confusion as patrons rose, some fleeing, others frozen in shock. Lincoln, struck, slumped forward in the box. Those around him reacted swiftly, aides and attendants moving with urgency to provide assistance. The world narrowed to a sequence of instinctive responses, yet the gravity of what had transpired, the deliberate targeting of the nation's leader, was unmistakable. The theater, once a space of entertainment and camaraderie, transformed instantly into a scene of human vulnerability, historical consequence, and profound tragedy. Mary Todd Lincoln, in shock yet resolute, leaned toward her husband, her hands grasping his as aides attended. The president's breathing was shallow, and despite the frantic pair administered, it became increasingly evident that the wound was severe, mortal. The chaos of the theater contrasted starkly with the private, intimate struggle unfolding within the box. Lincoln's presence, even in pain, retained a quiet dignity, an awareness of self and circumstance that transcended immediate physical suffering. Attendants moved swiftly to transport Lincoln to a private space, carrying him from the box as the audience's panic intensified. Gas lamps flickered against the ornate walls, casting long, quivering shadows that mirrored the uncertainty of the moment. Each step, each action was underscored by a blend of procedural necessity and human desperation. In those minutes, the weight of leadership, personal loss, and historical awareness coalesced into an inescapable reality. The nation's president had been struck, and history would bear witness to the consequences. Lincoln, conscious in fleeting intervals, reflected on the life he had led, the responsibilities he had borne, and the fragile state of the nation. Despite immense physical pain, his mind maintained remarkable clarity. He thought of the Union, of soldiers returning home, of families rebuilding, and of the principles for which he had labored tirelessly. Even as mortality approached, his focus remained on legacy, duty, and the enduring moral fabric of the nation. Aboard the stretcher and moved through the theater's corridors, Lincoln received the care possible in the moment. Physicians and aides worked with deliberate precision, their hands steady despite the emotional turbulence surrounding them. Each assessment of pulse, breathing, and consciousness was a battle against time, human limitation, and the stark finality of injury. Lincoln's responses, when perceptible, were measured and composed, reflecting a lifelong discipline of reflection, patience, and acute awareness. Mary Todd Lincoln remained unwavering, a presence of profound emotional support. Her words, whispered yet resolute, offered comfort, acknowledgement, and human connection amidst the chaos. In these final moments, the intimate bond between husband and wife, tested through years of hardship, grief, and public scrutiny, manifested with remarkable intensity.
Outside the theater, the carriage awaited, prepared to convey Lincoln to the nearest medical attention. The journey, brief in physical distance, yet monumental in significance, unfolded against a backdrop of darkness and anticipation. Each motion, each carriage wheel's turn, marked the passage from immediate trauma to historical consequence. Lincoln's consciousness, fragile yet intact in moments, processed the significance of events with clarity. The preservation of the Union, the continuity of governance, and the enduring responsibilities of leadership beyond individual mortality. Arriving at the boarding point, Lincoln was transferred with care to a nearby location prepared for medical attention. Physicians assessed the wound, noting its fatal nature. Yet even in recognition of the inevitability of death, the president's focus remained on humanity, the nation's future, and the moral underpinnings of leadership. His final reflections, private and unspoken, encompassed both personal legacy and the larger arc of history he had shaped. Mary Todd Lincoln, now in the presence of trusted aides and physicians, remained steadfast. Her attention was divided between immediate care, emotional support, and the silent acknowledgement that the course of history had irrevocably shifted. Each gesture, word, and glance carried the weight of personal loss and historical witness, a microcosm of the interplay between intimate human experience and public ramifications of tragedy. Lincoln's final consciousness was a blend of reflection, awareness, and moral contemplation. He considered the Union he had preserved, the lives saved and transformed, and the principles he had championed. Despite the inevitability of physical death, his mind lingered on hope, justice, and the continuity of ideals beyond personal mortality. These meditations, private yet profound, framed the final human dimension of a public figure whose life had been defined by empathy, intellect, and enduring moral courage. In those hours, as physical life ebbed, the intellectual and ethical legacy of Lincoln crystallized. Physicians, attendants, and family bore witness to the convergence of human fragility and historical consequence. The quiet, methodical presence he maintained in the face of mortal danger reflected a lifelong pattern of attentiveness, reflection, and moral resolve. The darkness of the evening sealed not merely his death, but the enduring significance of his leadership, vision, and human presence. As the night deepened, the city remained largely unaware of the magnitude of events unfolding. Within the private spaces surrounding the theater and the White House, grief, urgency, and reflection intertwined. Lincoln's final moments were marked by dignity, composure, and awareness. The convergence of personal mortality and national destiny created a tableau that would echo through history,
illuminating both the vulnerability and the profound moral fortitude of the man who had guided the nation through its most perilous moments. Even in death, Lincoln's presence exerted influence. The moral clarity, intellectual rigor, and empathy that had characterized his life became tangible to all who bore witness. His legacy, in essence, was sealed in darkness, not as an absence, but as a concentrated imprint of principle, reflection, and enduring leadership. The nation's grief, mourning, and subsequent reflection would be shaped by these final hours, forming the foundation upon which memory, history, and civic consciousness would be constructed.